Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jess Dickey.
I'm Phoenix Elliott.
And today we have Phoenix Elliott with us, as you just heard.
This stuff is my special interest. When I learned some more about y'all's podcast, which Jess is doing, also Jess is one of my partners, I was like, oh man, this thing is too high value. You can't not do it. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Why this is happening is like, this
is your passion.
Just got to do replacing guilt.
Yeah.
I also feel a little bit like that about the courage to be disliked and maybe some other things, but
you feel that it would make your community better if everyone in your community was familiar with this stuff.
Right. Like, this is the kind of thing that I think, actually, literally everyone should read.
And no one can see the arm pumping unless you could hear it.
Oh, yeah.
that was some serious physical emotion behind that, too.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, then, let's get into it. Actually, this is a really good week for me and Steven because we didn't have to do, reading and preparing or anything because we were promised that we would be taught things today. So, no pressure or anything, guys.
Not only are we going to teach you things, we're going to replace an emotion of yours.
Wait a minute.
With a better emotion.
It sounds like a hack.
It is kind of a hack.
I mean, it's a hack that takes, a lot of work over a long time.
Sounds more like learning something.
Yeah. Am I going to want to have this emotion replaced? Because I'm kind of attached to most of mine.
There's a section about that.
Okay.
Yes, the emotion is guilt and tends not to be a pleasant emotion. This is the web series called Replacing Guilt. It's a series of blog posts by Nate Soares, who's the executive director of MIRI, which is the Machine Intelligence Research Institute.
How long ago was this written?
That's a good question. Is there a date on it?
The first post was in 2015.
Okay, so it's a few years old, but relatively new. The whole series can be found at Nate's website, which is mindingourway.com/guilt.
That's why that name was familiar.
Yeah, he's got some other stuff on there too, but this series is self-contained. The objective is to help people who are driven primarily with guilt-based motivation. It contains some helpful reframes and techniques for, quote, building and maintaining a powerful intrinsic drive without the need to spur yourself with guilt. As someone who personally has been driven hugely by guilt in the past, and this is also something I currently struggle with a lot, I think a lot of people in the rationalist and EA communities could get a lot of value out of this series of posts. It's not just addressing guilt, but I found that reading it also strengthened my resolve, helped make me more effective, and it did a lot of work towards alleviating some of my depression and anxiety around specifically productivity. So that's my recommendation for why you should read it. It also makes some really cool moral arguments that kind of hide in the beginning of it. I kind of skimmed past that part in the beginning, but when I reread it, I was really impressed by some of the parts about just philosophy and moral questions. Yes?
Yeah, so I guess I was going to say, it sounds like, you're about to get into the large chunks of the series of posts.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited about and kind of wanted just to prime the audience for was that since I didn't want to, not that I didn't want to, I wanted to read it. I just didn't want to find time to read it.
It is long.
So, no, it's a little long, but it's the benefit of doing it this way is that you two have read it at least once each, and it's going to be more of a learning experience for me and Eneasz, and thus we can kind of proxy the audience and ask questions and do the learning at the same time. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I like that format.
How long is long?
It's about book length if you go by word count. And we won't be able to cover all of the specific ideas. There's about 30 blog posts in it. But there's can cover the themes and some of the ideas.
Yeah, there's 5 chapters each, or sections, or I'm not sure what to call them, but they're made up of a bunch of blog posts, and there's kind of an overarching idea. It's still worth going and reading the individual ones, but there's generally here's the overarching theme that we're going to do for these 5 blog posts, and then these are the little sub themes.
I bet by the end you can sell me on this.
Well, the one thing I will say is that this is for something that is book length, this is very skimmable because he tends to repeat his points because it's actually a blog. So he'll repeat things from previous posts so that people have context. So if you're good at speed reading, you could read this pretty quickly.
I'm not, but I did. I kind of like how the Yudkowsky sequences are kind of skimmable because they link to old stuff, and he makes some of the he might have a whole post devoted to making, say, the idea of making beliefs pay rent, but then later he'll just use that one sentence and like get a hyperlink because it's like, all right, if you need context, click this. So you're saying it's that sort of format too?
And he'll re-explain concepts sometimes.
Cool.
So you can usually just like skip ahead.
It also, it connects to some other posts in Less Wrong and to some other blog posts. So if you did want to get deeper, it has the little clickable links like Less Wrong. I feel like a good way to read this, I mean, unless you just face the whole thing like me, would be maybe reading one post per day. If you're going to try to make it into kind of a meditative habit, I could see that being a cool way to try to absorb the material. And then it's also not so daunting of a big old chunk of words.
Yeah, that would be a really good month.
That would be a good month. All right. So I'm going to attempt to summarize some of the key points, and feel free to ask questions as we go. Chapter 1 is, or Section 1, whatever the first series of blog posts are about distinguishing between two different types of guilt. The first section addresses the restless guilt, or I think he said listless guilt as well, that people feel when some part of them thinks they're not doing what's important. So if you're someone who struggles with morality and spends a lot of time wondering what the right thing or the best thing is to do with your life, I recommend not skipping this part or like skimming through it, kind of waiting to get to the better stuff later on. Because this part it actually contains some really powerful arguments, and this was the part that I kind of overlooked during my first read through.
This sounds like really interesting. What are some of these arguments?
Mainly, it addresses like common arguments about whether anything really matters, or do people really do anything because they care about stuff or because of morality, or are people just selfish and doing everything for signaling?
And what are the answers?
The answers are, well, it gets a lot deeper in depth, but the TLDR version is that A, it is possible to care about things outside yourself, and B, that things larger than yourself are important, and you're allowed to care about doing something about them.
So I think this was a question you asked earlier of like, but I like guilt. It's useful.
Yeah, or maybe not. I like it, but...
Well, yeah, but like I need it.
Yeah.
The idea across all of these is to replace guilt with intrinsic motivation, and that like having things that you care about that drive you towards those, instead of like driving yourself with self-punishment.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think like this was, first of all, it's called replacing guilt, not eliminating guilt. Something's going in its place. But so when we first talked about it, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I got the 90-second version, the first thing that came to my mind was like physical pain. And it's like you touch a stovetop or something hot or get poked and you're like, ow, that hurts. And it would be that serves a very important evolutionary purpose. Like you don't want to eliminate that, but it would sure be cool if you could replace it with something else. Like in probably was the God Delusion. I think Richard Dawkins talks about like the evolutionary origins of pain briefly, and how it's like physically imaginable that you could have like just kind of like an alarm in your head rather than like this fucking hurts. And it would sure be nice if like you could. I mean, for me, it's the kind of thing where, I don't know, you hit your toe on something and you're like, oh, okay, ow, yeah, that hurt. Like I noticed I hit that. I won't do it. I won't do it again, brain. You bet. And then it hurts for like 10 more minutes. It would sure be nice if you could just tell the part of your brain that's screaming at you that this hurts, that, hey, I'm aware of it. We're good now.
Do you think you'd be as motivated if the pain went away quickly? Like as motivated in the future, I mean.
Maybe it wouldn't be just like an on-off flag. Maybe it could be like an internal siren with different volumes. I don't know.
So quick side tangent. You can totally train yourself to do that and to react to pain this way. You then have to like do some of it on manual, where you have to like make sure that you don't actually die from things that are hurting you. But like this is like how Wim Hof stuff works, where you just like you learn to interpret stuff as signals instead of like automatically convulsing.
How what stuff works?
Wim Hof. He's the guy with ice powers.
The Iceman.
Oh, okay, I've heard of him. Yes,
it applies equally well to pain.
Okay, yeah. No, I mean, I know there's levels of doing this that go way above what I can do, but I mean, I'm at the point now where if I do wang my foot on something, I tend to like, I notice it before I don't even react before I feel my face like grimacing in it. I just I can catch it at that point most times. But then there are people, you know, that I've seen on whatever videos of, I guess back when cable was a thing, you know, like the martial arts experts who could stand there and like just take a full kick to the nuts or like a slap to the face and not flinch. That sounds like that sounds like a human attainable skill. Then that's pretty cool. So if you can do that with pain, it sounds like we could do this with guilt maybe too.
Yeah, there's a few posts that I think I'll comment on after we get through the initial summaries. That update from the Sucker Punch has something to do with that, and Don't Steer with Guilt. I'll talk about those later.
Yeah, those are two good ones to pull out.
Neat.
You mentioned briefly also the idea that does anything matter? I think you said, or something like that. Did I hear that wrong?
That was what it is. That's what like the first chapter is addressing.
Is that something that can be addressed in like a single chapter? Because I think I personally have been struggling with existential angst for a long time. And
yeah, no, I'd suggest reading it.
Nate solved it, bro.
Yeah.
Didn't you hear? You waited this long to tell me?
It's over. I fixed it. Next chapter is, or arc, Sora is convincing the readers that they should drop their obligations and get rid of the word should entirely from their vocabulary. He asks, if there's nothing that you felt like you should be doing, then what would you really be wanting to do with your life? The point being that should is this word that people use to kind of beat themselves up, or a false, like, motivator. I need to do this thing because I should do it. Because, well, who's saying that you should? Is it, like, your mom's voice from when you were a child, or is it your boss, but, like, you don't actually care about, you know, like, trying to figure out what you're, in the first chapter, what do you actually care about, and then calibrate towards, is this thing that I feel like I should do actually pushing me towards that?
I really like that, and I can't reflect an articulate thought on that in real time, but that sounds actually really powerfully resonating. I think it's common in the rationalist community too to like look at something like traditions of I don't know, surrounding funerals or solstices or weddings, and say, okay, well that's what people are supposed to do, or what, you know, the script says, and then not reading from the script. This sounds like a more generalized version of that. I guess meta note, this is part of the reason I think I was disliked so much by my teachers through like primary school up until about high school, because I would do the same thing. I'd ask and get all these clarifying questions and suck up a lot of class time. It wasn't until high school where I got teachers that appreciated that.
It's like I've clearly shown that I can do basic algebra. Like, why do I have to do this whole worksheet?
Yeah, it was more just like, oh, that's really interesting. Can we talk about that for 10 minutes? And like not really letting them get away from it. But the good ones would say, you know what, we got to get through the lesson plan, but swing by after class or after school. Yeah. Let's talk about it as much as you want. Those are the teachers I got in high school.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will cease interrupting, or no, I won't. Let's be honest. but I'm enjoying this. That's really cool.
You'll cease feeling guilty about interrupting.
I already have. Perfect.
I am occasionally an etymology nerd, and I really enjoyed the etymology of the word should, in that it is actually just the past tense of shall, which it kind of helps me think about this, because it feels like when I say like I should do this thing, it's like saying like I am declaring that at some point in the past I already decided that I like should do this thing.
Yeah, I've pre-committed to doing this thing.
But a lot of the times, like you didn't do that before. You're doing it right now. Like you're pretending that you already pre-committed and like acting like you already have the weight of that pre-commitment on you. And you.
That's an interesting thing to learn.
Yeah, I personally have had a tap even before I read this of, if I say I have to do this or I need to do that, trying to just always reframe that as I want to do this. Yeah. And part of the reason is, if you say I have to or I should or I need to, it kind of feels negative, like some outside pressure is making you do it, and that sucks. Whereas if you make it seem like your own choice, then it feels better, and then also you can gut check it. Because if you say I want to pay this bill today, I don't know, that's a bad example.
Well, when I was renovating this place, I never thought of things that like I should be doing right now. It was always like, this needs to get done, and I want to get the place done so I can move in, so gonna go to it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, or even for me, like, so I have a lot of anxiety about explaining things to audiences, and I was like going back and forth a lot about whether to even be here on this podcast today. And when I like looked at like, okay, do I want to do this? Like, if I say like I want to do this thing, the next thought is like, okay, well, why do I want to do this thing? And there are actually reasons that I want to do it. There's reasons that I don't want to do it, but it turns out like the reasons that I wanted to do it outweighed those of like, I want to be the kind of person that can do this thing. And actually examining like why you're deciding to do a thing can go a long way in feeling intrinsic motivation about it instead of guilt.
All right.
Yeah. The third arc, Soares introduces techniques for building intrinsic drive without the need for guilt as a motivator. He points out in these chapters, working yourself ragged is not a virtue. That's actually the name of one of the posts. And that the work too hard and then rest a long time narrative is a dangerous narrative.
Oh,
And
why's that?
working too hard, you burn yourself out. And then when you're resting a long time, then you're not being productive, and then you're feeling shitty about it.
I think you also lose a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
There's also I think this is also where he talks about the resting in motion thing. That a lot of people think of rest as like just sitting doing nothing, like recuperating. But he makes the argument that like really restorative rest is more like actually you're just doing whatever you want and not being constrained by other people or systems or whatever. And that like if you really feel like just getting up and going on a hike, that can be really restful even though you're like doing active stuff.
Yeah.
I absolutely find that true. There's definitely a different feeling between I still have energy to go for a hike and I'm kind of recuperating from this versus I've burnt myself out at work and now all I have the energy for is to scroll Facebook and drink a beer and be kind of low grade, like dissociating or kind of miserable. That's not rest.
Yeah.
That reminds me there's a subreddit that I like that isn't as like pejorative or mocking as it sounds, called White People Twitter. For example, Julia Galef was on, I saw not on like the front page of it, but it was I probably saw this on Facebook like 3 years ago before I stopped being on there, but it was like a picture of her tweet that was like she went and saw a dog, or like she went to go like try and pet a dog that like then didn't want to pet her or didn't want to be pet, and then as she was leaving, the person said, "You always do this. You never make friends," or something to their dog. And so there was one that I saw on there yesterday that was, quote, "Tired of explaining that I don't have time doesn't mean literally every second of my schedule is accounted for, but rather I'm giving as much of myself as I'm currently able to give." And I like that a lot. I spend a lot of my time, and I'm not, that sounds like I'm more like stretched out than I am, but like most of my time at home is just like relaxing and doing nothing productive, which I like to be productive during a several hour chunk of the day. And then I like to go home and like watch reruns or,
Yeah, like wind down.
Yeah, exactly. And I do a lot of that. So, anyway, that was somehow relevant. I've forgotten how, other than I guess nicely reframing things and
tied into their whole resting and relaxing.
Yes, thank you. I knew it wasn't out of nowhere.
Yeah, somewhere in here, I forget which section, there's a concept of sort of managing different streams of work or things you have to do. And like there's job work. Man, I should stop cracking my knuckles. Like there's job work, like interpersonal relationship work. And like one of the things that you have to do is like take time to recover and like rest. And like if you don't do any of that, you'll have bad results.
Yeah.
you have to like balance all of these things, and like taking time to do something not productive is actually important.
I think that's why I've only worked at 2 different tech companies, and the one I'm at now doesn't actually have a ping pong table available to us, but their main office does, and I don't play ping pong. But the point is, like, I think at a good workplace, if they have things to do like that aren't work related, no one should get upset at you for, if you use it for 15 minutes a day. Like, a couple weeks ago, me and my 3 coworkers went out into the alley between the buildings by our office and like threw a football around. And like that was actually really got like just moving, and like the act of like having to coordinate and throw stuff, like that was actually good to get the juices flowing again. So
Oh, that's like team bonding.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like actual team bonding as opposed to the forced company
Yeah.
events.
Right. But I guess like 15 minutes of like completely not doing anything for the boss time actually leads to more productive last 4 hours of the day, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've actually shown that in workplaces where they do expect you to be at your desk every minute that you're on the clock, and like my last job where can't go on Facebook for 2 seconds, you're only allowed to be doing work stuff on your computer, you can't use your phone, you can't take breaks unless it's like your half-hour mandated lunch break. Human brains don't work like that.
Yeah.
No matter how hard we try to domesticate them with, 15 years of schooling, that's just not how it shakes out.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Like, people will get much more work done if I guess the Pomodoro method is kind of work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. There's a reason that they have you do that. You can't just keep working in these uninterrupted blocks.
Not 4-hour uninterrupted blocks.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the third arc. Instead of giving into society's urge to work unrealistically hard or long, or giving up and believing that it's not even worth trying, Soares instead suggests that we can change our behavior by approaching obstacles from a mindset of experimentation and creativity, instead of attempting to berate and guilt ourselves into submission. And I really like that approach. I found that this is especially good when you're doing something boring or repetitive, and you can't get up the motivation for that reason. It can kind of like make it a game and be like, well, how could I actually make this harder? Or like, how fast can I finish doing this thing, and then like time myself, or I don't know, what can I do this backwards or something. And he also argues there's no such thing as a bad person in the third arc, and includes some helpful reframes for self-compassion. So there's a lot going on in this middle part.
Is that no such thing as a bad person in like the Mr. Rogers / I don't know, or is it just like the unconditional acceptance, like psychologist point of view?
I'm not sure. I don't remember what Mr. Rogers says. I think it's more of a, you are like, I don't know, there are bad actions and not bad people. Do you remember, Phoenix?
The way I remember it is basically like the concept of a bad person is not helpful and is just a way to apply guilt, and that like you can just let go of the concept of people being bad. Like basically everyone is trying to do whatever they're trying to do, and like just like how like the concept of evil is kind of silly and unrealistic.
Right. No, I love it. That's perfect, and that ties into last week's Less Wrong post about all your enemies innately evil, and it's like, no, they're just like, people. I love it. I was gonna basically just repeat what you said, but that's a phrase that I like a lot, that people are just trying their best, even if they're being a dick, even if they're, so that's the thing, is they're being a jerk, they're doing mean things. They're not jerks, they're not mean people, they're people doing those things,
Yeah, and this focuses more on your self-concept. The idea of Soares is kind of bringing up in the first three sections objections people might have, like, well, how do I know what matters? And then in this one, it's kind of, what if I am just a bad person? So this seems not so much to be looking at the outside world and trying to judge other people, but the tendency people have to be like, I didn't do this essay on time, I'm a bad person. You can just be like, I didn't do this essay on time, and that sucks, but I'll try harder next time. There's no reason to yell at yourself, especially after the fact.
It sounds a lot harder to do if you are always reminded that you have hurt a person.
If you've hurt someone?
Yeah.
I don't know if that applies, because this is more of like kind of failing to live up to your own expectations.
Okay.
I could see maybe if you failed to live up to, say, your mom's expectations and it feels like you're hurting her.
So this is for like a very specific type of guilt.
Oh man, I feel like now's a good time to talk about Update from the Sucker Punch, though.
I'll go for it.
So this post is this is one of like 10 posts in this section, which is in particular about like if you've done something that's harmed someone else, and like there's one path that people often take where it's like you realize that you've hurt someone else, and then you spend the next like week just sort of like punching yourself in the brain about it, and just like applying guilt to yourself over and over. And Nate makes the argument that instead of guilt, you can do a thing that like one might describe using similar words, but as long as like if you say you just have like sort of a pretend like agent that like doesn't have emotions and just tries to do things well, like it's easy to imagine this thing would like just learn what it did wrong and then like try to do the right thing in the future. and then be done with it. And Nate makes the suggestion that you can do that. You can allow yourself to not like punish yourself with guilt and just try to figure out what went wrong, what the mistake was, and how to change one's future behavior to not make that mistake again. And then once you've done that, that's actually like the only like duty you really have in this kind of situation is to try to be better. And self-flagellating is really just a social signaling kind of thing to show people that you cared. But like other people probably don't want you to be self-flagellating if they like care about your well-being. And so like if you and other people are on the same page about this, you can just both agree to not self-flagellate about these kinds of things and just try to update instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to wrangle emotions like that, but
It
I guess
is.
that's what this post is all about.
All of this is very difficult, but it works if you like practice it.
Okay.
Yeah, the update from the Sucker Punch, I remember distinctly after reading this, like the next day, I think I ended up using it, and I caught myself in the pattern of, I fucked this thing up, wait a minute, okay, what did I do wrong? There was this thing, what did I learn from this? That I, in the future, should do it this way. Okay, now I get to stop feeling bad. And it's like I've committed to not doing this in the future, and it actually worked. It didn't completely get rid of the guilt or the bad feelings about having messed up, but I kept remembering, like, every time I would catch myself starting to feel bad, I would be like, oh yeah, no, we already went through this, I know what I learned from that, and then, like, it would alleviate it pretty considerably.
Yeah. It basically, like, you're allowed to not get stuck in a negative self-talk loop about it.
Yes.
Which is like what every therapist would tell you.
The fourth arc has more techniques for building intrinsic drive. Source suggests drawing on the ways the world around you is broken, and figuring out if there's anything that you can do to make it less so.
Ooh, that's a good
So,
one.
what?
That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, what I liked about this is that he specifies your intrinsic drive doesn't have to necessarily be save the world, or like build a galaxy-spanning human civilization, but it could be, I want to help this one specific person, and or like I want to help dogs. I don't know. You just look for a way that the world's broken. Man, there's lots of stray dogs. What could I do to fix it? And then you have a goal. Go ahead.
And like the really important qualifier here is that it has to be something that you personally actually care about, not something that you've been convinced by other people is like a good thing to care about.
Yeah, or not doing it for signaling purposes or whatever. Unless, like, I don't know. I could, I guess I could see a scenario where I'm trying to be a politician, so I'm going to do stuff for signaling reasons because it leads to this main goal that I have of power. Like, all right, whatever. So, generally, you probably don't want to do stuff for signaling purposes, though.
Speaking of signaling purposes, I'm still kind of hung on the last. It was from the last chapter, but the like that self-flagellation is largely like social signaling. But I've had periods in my life where I like would wake up and have like a few seconds where I like immediately felt like shit before like like that took me to remember the thing I was feeling bad about the day before, and like nobody knew, like that was just me like having this problem, right? So that's not, I wasn't signaling that to anybody but myself.
Yeah. In my case, when I do it, it seems like I'm self-signaling. I think that this might just be like pop psychology, but like my impression is that this is a habit that you learn from your parents or from other authority figures, that when you mess up, you have to apologize and maybe grovel. Like basically be like, I messed up, I'm so sorry, I'm really proving that I know, I understand that I made this mistake, and you do it to yourself. So you're like internally signaling to yourself that you are a good person.
I kind of wish we had Matt Freeman here. We can interrogate him on whether that is the various aspects of your sub-agent signaling to each other.
Oh, well...
I think I can speak to the fact that it probably is, right?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know what he would say, but that's how I picture it. I mean, I the way that I kind of bifurcate in my head, like if I'm having something like this wasn't a technique I had back when I was having this guilt issue that I'm thinking of. But I mean, you can have the part of you that's like really beating yourself up, and you can just kind of talk to it as a separate person and be like, look, it's okay. we can get through this, and I know why you feel this way, but we can do this instead, and sort of like treating your sub agents as if they're different people in your mind. I think that's maybe not what Matt would say, but that's how I would do it. But I'm interested to hear what he would say as well.
So a couple of models about this. One is that growing up, people tend to know other people who apply guilt at them. Like often it's one's parents or teachers or whoever. And the way we internalize this is that we sort of build up a model of those people, maybe sort of glom them all into one sort of pseudo person in our mind. And then we just sort of run that in the background as just like part of us. And so I think the sort of parts thing of like one part is sort of guilting the rest is pretty accurate. And that this is I think the reason that it works this way is so that like if you do this preemptively to yourself, you actually, in assuming that it's accurately modeling the way the world is going to interact with and like possibly punish you, preempting that sort of reduces the external harm. Where like if you can self-flagellate before getting actually flagellated by someone else, this is protective in a way.
I think that makes sense though. If you remember it, by all means, just shoot it out. But I think you helped me resolve the distinction. Like it's not social signaling necessarily, because I just imagined as the hypothetical audience that I might draw contention with that. Like I'm not signaling to anybody. Fuck that. This must all be wrong. But self-signaling makes sense.
This also reminds me a lot of like the best way to lie to other people is to convincingly lie to yourself first.
Speaketh George Costanza. It's not a lie if you believe it.
And that like maybe the best way to like really signal to other people that like you're sufficiently punishing yourself is to actually punish yourself.
So speaketh Robin Hansen. I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I like it. All right, thanks for letting me dig into that a little bit.
No, that was good.
So one of the posts that we from section 3 that I wanted to talk about earlier, don't steer with guilt, is so if you imagine like if you have like a graph of like you're in this current state and you have like actions that you could do, and there's like this whole big branching graph of like paths you could take. Nate argues that the correct way to use guilt is to set up guilt on like some of these states where like you really want to avoid these, where like you don't you really want to avoid accidentally killing someone with your car, and so you like place on like the path where like you get really drunk and then drive your car, like a big pile of guilt like waiting there. Like you aren't there yet, but it's like there, you can see it waiting for you. A problem that a lot of people have is they just put it in way too many places, and that if you're hitting like the guilt branches very often at all, then you're wasting a lot of energy on hitting these like self-punishment outcomes to try to steer where you go. And just this is really inefficient. And that he makes the argument that instead of like steering through these paths with guilt, you steer with intrinsic motivation instead. And you save guilt for like the really negative outcomes that you like really strongly want to avoid and that are like worth punishing yourself for, like if you hit those, and like leaving the threat of self-punishment there as a way to like avoid them, but not just using that all the time.
Makes it much more potent when it is used too.
Yeah, like I feel like the example of driving drunk and hitting a child probably is one of those times where guilt would be appropriate. And you don't want to use the same amount of guilt to steer yourself away from the cookie jar.
Right.
Really hitting any person, not just a child.
Yeah.
What if it's Hitler?
What if it's baby Hitler?
Okay, in that case, you should feel proud.
All right,
Yeah.
we solved philosophy 101.
I think there's something to be said too about like if you just feel guilty all the time, it's not even doing anything anymore.
It's not effective.
Like, it's not even steering at that point.
Yeah, then it's just driving with the parking brake on.
Yeah.
Yep.
The analogy to pain there still fits. Like if your foot hurt all the time, whether or not you just banged it on furniture, then it's not giving you a useful signal.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. I'm really glad that you thought of that.
I'll see how many more times I can shoehorn it in.
So the thing you just said about driving with the parking brake on, that's one thing that people find if they're driven by guilt is that it can be paralyzing. Where like no options look good, and you just can't do anything because everything looks bad.
Right.
And I think this happens for a lot of people.
Yeah. God damn. My brother just borrowed the Neon Genesis Evangelion series from me, and I think that's basically one of the primary emotional themes of that series. Is that here are people that feel terrible about everything they do and there's no good options. Have guilt, friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. The end of the fourth arc talks about that when you're given the choice between bad and worse, you can feel good about choosing bad. That sometimes there are a lot of bad choices, but you're still allowed to make value judgments. He also talks about coming to terms with the fact that you might fail, and discusses how in this process you can turn guilt into resolve, and you can feel fulfilled with struggling to make the future as bright as you can make it without beating yourself up about it or taking on more than you can realistically handle. So it's kind of the techniques of not needing to do the absolute best thing all the time, just doing a better thing. Yeah, basically, beating yourself up about something is inefficient if you want to actually achieve something.
Another thing that applying guilt to certain paths, another effect that has is you can make things like, you can make certain paths like unthinkable because like, well, I can't do this path because then I would be a bad person. And if a path is unthinkable, then you can't actually like work with it and try to find like the optimal outcome. Like if actually all of the options are somewhere between bad and worse, you need to be able to think about them. And if you just write all of them off immediately as like, this makes me a bad person, so I can't do it, then like you can't do like
literally anything.
Yeah, you can't do math about like which one is actually better.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with a coworker who makes an effort to like not just eat a environment or a suffering friendly diet, but an environmentally friendly diet. He tries to buy like ethically sourced clothes and all that stuff. Like it's not a rebuttal to like the vegan to point out that like, you know, they kill mice when they harvest the grain, right? Like that. Yes, that sucks, but that's like a reality of it, right? Unless you're finding some safe way to grow this all yourself and like carefully hand remove each bug or something before you harvest it, some suffering is going to be involved, but that doesn't mean that like you're not doing a good thing. It might not be the perfect thing because the perfect options aren't on the table, so you choose the less bad one.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That reminds me of like I feel like this sounds like a Scott Alexander style nuance, so correct me if I'm wrong, but was he the one that talked about like maybe eating vegetarian one day a week being like a lot better than eating meat all the time or something?
He's definitely said something like that. Yeah. I think he personally has some kind of rule where he doesn't eat meat unless he's going out to eat, if I remember correctly, and then he almost never goes out to eat.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's not original to him, but I think he's mentioned that.
Yeah, at least I heard it from, I think it was Late Star Codex, the idea that like you can make an improvement, and if you're not ready to make the commitment to doing something all the way, you can still do a bit. It's like giving 5% to charity, and it's like, look, could you afford to give 30%? Probably, if you pinched, depending on who you are. But like, yes, maybe you could theoretically afford to give 30%, but like that's not a sacrifice you're willing to give. But 5% sounds totally manageable, and it's way more than most people. You're still doing a really good thing. So, All right, I like it.
And then in the last arc, Soares introduces some mental stances that make guilt seem like an alien concept. A particularly good article here is one called Confidence All the Way Up that I wanted to particularly pull out. I highly recommend reading this one if you don't have the time to read the whole series. I think we can link to that one and the other two that we mentioned. Confidence All the Way Up teaches the skill of being confident in your ability to make a difference and be effective while not being overly sure of anything. He also discusses the concept of desperate, reckless defiance, each of which is a link, which is a kind of reframe of the general less wrong methods of rationality kind of ethos of doing the impossible or having the heroic mindset, and it's very inspiring. Well, I've actually had a quote pulled out from Confidence All the Way Up, which was, "Insofar as I'm uncertain of my content, I'm confident in my analysis. Except I'm not fully confident in my analysis. But insofar as I'm uncertain of my analysis, I'm confident in my reasoning procedures. Except I don't put faith there either. But insofar as I'm uncertain of my reasoning procedures, I'm confident in my friends and failsafe mechanisms that'll eventually force me to take notice and update. Except that's not quite right either. It's more like every lack of confidence is covered by confidence one meta level higher in the cognitive chain. The result is something that reads socially as confidence, regardless of how much empirical uncertainty I'm under. And I remember that one also really helping me, where I was kind of trying to figure out what confidence is, or maybe more specifically assertiveness. That's something I struggle with a lot. And I was coming at it from totally the wrong angle of, like, this is a way that you pretend. Like, it's a way that you do tone of voice and body posture and facial expressions to convey that nothing upsets you. And I like this take much better, which is kind of a much calmer idea of confidence.
Yeah,
I don't know if calmer is the right word, but...
Instead of trying to fake it, there's actually a way to get there.
Yeah, and that's to actually be confident in, well, I'm pretty good at what I do, and if I screw up, there's my coworker who can help me, and if he screws up, we could go to the boss, and then, like, if none of us can figure it out, like, there's always ways to cover your ass.
There's a thing that comes up a lot when people are talking about confidence of, like on some level, you know that, like, no matter how bad you are at this thing you're going to do, like, you're probably not going to die because of it, and that, like, even if you fail at doing the thing, even if, like, you fail at the mental processes that would, like, let you maybe try to figure out how to do it, like, there's still other layers of being able to handle existing, that there's always sort of fallbacks, that if you can notice all the layers of fallbacks there, you can feel confident that on some level it will work out, even if not necessarily completely on, like, the immediate level.
All right.
Yep.
And is that the entirety of the thing?
That's what I got.
Cool. And so how has... I guess I'm going to start with, how has this helped you overall?
The parts that helped me were the replacing guilt thing, the recognizing it when let me back up a little bit. I went through a couple periods of having, like, lost my house in a fire, being unemployed, and one of the things that I was struggling with was a lot of depression and feeling bad about not working full time during the periods where I was in school or when I was unemployed. And it led to having just whole days where I just felt bad about myself the entire day. And reading this helped me to kind of look at that feeling and be like, well, what is there any purpose for me to feel bad right now? Is this actually helping me in any way? And mostly, no. Like, I was still motivated to finish my classes and then go apply for a bunch of jobs and then, like, do all that stuff. And in between, it's like, that's what I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm. It seems so obvious, and it is a bit frustrating to talk about, because coming from where I was before, it was the least obvious thing in the world. Having been raised in an environment where it's like, yeah, you need to feel guilty all the time. I mean, I was raised Catholic.
For what it's worth, I think everyone can relate to a time in their life where they felt that way, where it's
most
like...
people, probably.
Yeah, at least most. I mean, I can certainly think of times where I sat around doing very little other than just, like, again, feeling guilty or feeling like I fucked up or something. And sure, now I can look back and say, man, you could have just not wasted all that energy. But at the time, you don't really see an option. But what you're saying is that if you had been armed with these techniques beforehand, you might have seen that option almost immediately, or at least sooner.
Yeah, you can catch yourself. And then there was something that I forgot to actually clarify or follow up on. The first chapter talked about the listless guilt, and that was the idea of being guilty about not doing anything in particular. And then the second type of guilt was the pointed guilt, which was the guilt about not doing one particular thing that you feel like you should be doing.
Yeah, I was going to say what I've gotten out of this especially is there's a lot of little mental habits that once you start seeing these patterns and, like, seeing, like, sort of the good and bad versions of them, even if you're generally pretty good at this, there's still, like, a lot of little ways that these can sneak in. And this has gotten me a lot better at noticing when I'm doing that and, like, being able to consciously intervene. And eventually it sort of, like, percolates down and becomes a little bit more automatic. Another thing that I got out of it is, especially just, like, being in the rationalist EA community, especially in Berkeley, there's a lot of people are trying to save the world. And I learned that, like, literal world saving is not actually that intrinsically motivating for me. And I kept trying to use it in this way and kept failing and, like, kept just, like, not really doing anything with it because of that. And this is really helpful for letting me reorient around the things that actually drive me, which honestly I'm still working on some, but I don't constantly feel guilty about feeling like there's this thing that should be motivating that just isn't.
Or feeling bad that you're not personally trying to save the world single-handed.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I feel like I'd be much more like personally motivated to save the world if I felt like I had any reasonable avenue to doing so.
Yeah.
Like if I was Superman, and
Yeah.
instead of like being out there saving people or whatever, producing infinite energy for the planet, I was just sitting here recording a podcast and like holding a day job or something, then I think Superman should feel guilty for having a day job, right? But the fanfiction Metropolitan Man covers all of that. But yeah, I mean, I went through something like that too. I think shortly after I discovered the rationalist community, I'm like, oh my god, there's all this stuff out there, but I'm just not smart enough to do it. I don't know how to even get started. What could I even possibly contribute? And I guess years ago, I finally was just like, you know what? Nothing. I'll try and have fun, make some money, and maybe throw some money at the people who are doing this,
Right.
I also like to focus on smaller things that I can help with.
Yeah.
Local things, people near me that I care about, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Like, one of the best candidates of, like, thing I really care about looks more like helping people be more, like, emotionally, like, and, like, internally healthy, which is why things like this are my special interest and not like solving AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you need psychologists and you need people working on the community level. If like the entire population of the earth were all trying to save the world, focused on like the bigger goals and not focused on like helping your neighbor who just fell down the stairs, then your neighbor would be laying there on the floor and it's important to cover all your bases.
Well, if the entire population of the Earth was focused on saving the world, some of them would have to be allocated to these other things, like keeping the community running and helping the old lady down the stairs, and then they would be really upset that they're working on that instead of saving the world, so it's good to have a diversity of interests.
Yeah. Oh, there was a really good post. I think, I'm trying to remember the name and also who wrote it. I think Raymond Arnold wrote it, and it was about the village and the mission. That had a really good analysis of like the ways in which this kind of balance is important, and that if everyone is like laser focused on the mission, then like no one has friends.
Yeah, and also no one's cooking the meals.
Yeah.
Or cleaning the bathroom. It's important.
So how long did like absorbing this and implementing it in your life take? How much effort? What's the process like?
I'd say it's ongoing.
Yeah, I'm still doing that.
Yeah.
Every now and then I go back and look at it and I'm reminded of some things of like, oh yeah, I haven't done that in a while.
Yeah.
But
because these are kind of like, I would like to describe or to kind of compare stuff like this to CBT, where it's an ongoing therapeutic process where you're constantly catching the bad train of thought and then reframing it. And over time you get faster at catching it, better at preempting it, better at quickly coming up with a reason and then believing it.
Wait, quickly coming up with a reason and then believing
like
it?
a reframe. I'm trying to think of an example. One that I had a lot was, my friends don't really like me. They all think I'm annoying, and they're just like tolerating me to be polite. And then I would be like, no, I'm gonna go to the Less Wrong meetup and have a good time, and then update in favor of the last 2 times I went to Less Wrong, I had a good time. The last 3 times I went to Less Wrong, I had a good time. And like finally, it's been like, I've been going to these Less Wrong meetups for 3 months, and now when my brain tries to tell me nobody actually likes me there and I won't have a good time, it's gonna suck, and I'm like, no, all of my data shows the opposite, and you feel much more confident in it.
And for some data you didn't have, the last one that you missed, many people asked me where you were.
Oh.
So, I think this seems like analogous to like, how long did it take you to absorb and implement the sequences and the methods of rationality and benefit from them?
Right, still happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know, 7 years ish, and on plus. So,
Yeah. And you can still get stuff out of rereading them. I'm like, as we're doing the sequences on this podcast, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good one.
yeah.
Yeah, like going back and rereading this was really helpful for me because I had totally missed that beginning part about like the part where it was saying, here's how you can care about something, find something to care about, and then believe that it's worth caring about. It's actually like a really important step that I'm really surprised that I kind of just like breezed past the first time. I guess I already felt that way, or like didn't think I had anything to learn, but I was wrong.
Yeah. And when I first read this, that was like back when like I was constantly feeling kind of aimless because of like being surrounded by people trying to save the world and not quite knowing what thing I actually wanted instead. And sections 4 and 5 were like kind of hard to internalize back then, but I've gotten more to a place where like I can actually do anything with those.
So if you were going to leave a listener one takeaway now that they could implement before they, dive into this and start reading, what would be a thing they should take just to make immediate, cool life improvement?
Oh man, I have to choose.
I kind of think that like the one I said earlier about replacing the word should. Try to, if you catch yourself saying, I should do this, or I ought to be doing this, or I need to do this, try, I want to do this because, and if you have a reason, good, then you probably feel much more aligned and much less like someone's trying to bully you into doing something that you would have done anyway. If you don't have a reason, then maybe you don't really need to do it.
Cool.
I'm thinking of like some mundane ways to like practice that habit that, you don't have to start on hard mode with, resolving conflicts of guilt. Like this afternoon, I had the thought I should eat something for lunch because I'm not hungry, but I know it will be later. And so I think I'll try and set a flag in my head for whenever the word should comes up in my stream of consciousness and just say, Steven, you want to eat lunch now because if you don't, you're going to be really pissed and hungry at 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can definitely see that particular post, should considered harmful, is by far the one of these that I've seen passed around the most independently of the whole series.
Yeah, it's a good one.
What was is that should?
Is quote should considered harmful.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think we've named 4 specifically at this point, and we'll link to those ones. And you can read the whole thing if you want, or you can kind of just read the best of.
I'm looking through these and trying to find anything that I would recommend more, but I think that one is it's very nicely encapsulated, where a lot of the other things sort of require some of the context around them to use more. But I think that one's like a nice, easy tap to implement. Like, notice you're saying should about something, and then think about why and whether you actually want it.
Now I'm just trying to think of, if someone's listening to this and this sounds all very appealing and, that sounds great. I'd love to feel that way. But in somewhere in their head, they're like, no, I really should feel like crap about this because I've just fucked up. Like, is there a way that you would respond to that if someone came to you right now and was like, said that?
I would say that if they said I really deserve to feel like crap about this, I would just say why. Like, how is it helping you to continue to mentally beat yourself up about it? How is it helping the situation? Like,
right? Like, does this make you more effective?
I think a lot of people have an internalized sense of justice, though, that perhaps would be violated if they didn't continue feeling guilty for whatever they think their appropriate period of time is.
I would tell them to do the exercise of update with the sucker punch. Notice that this thing hurt, and then what did it teach you, and then what will you do in the future? And I think that you can absolve yourself of guilt if you've, in good faith, gone through each of those steps and like committed to trying to fix the thing that you did wrong or to do it better next time.
And I think you and I, are talking about 2 different kinds of examples. Like, you're talking about somebody who hurt somebody and feels bad about it, or, their fuck up caused actual harm or something. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm talking about the person who might just feel like, I don't know,
I'm doing nothing with my life. What's even the point?
Yeah, or, I can't think of a good example. Like, I should have tried harder in school or something.
Yeah,
or
like
I should have gone
test
or I should have gone, to get a master's degree, or I should have gone to higher education, and like,
I should have spent more time working out over the past year.
Yeah. And so, the way to that's an easy one for me to solve, having just learned what I've learned in the last hour, which is like, all right, cool. Instead of saying yeah, sure, you should have, you can move past that line of thinking and saying, all right, cool, start now. Like, I've got a friend who is, I think he's going to have his last he's stopping smoking. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to quit when I'm 30. And I think that's like the middle of September.
Okay.
And so, like, this is like looking at it from the other way, but this is a way that I like to think of that kind of like retrospective, I should have done this, I can just say, all right, cool. In 5 years, what will I be thinking that I should have done? And like there are boring answers, or there are boring ways to frame that question, but then you can look at like a thing you're doing, and it's like, yeah, I start every day with 2 donuts or something, and I don't walk more than I need to get to work or something. It's like, all right, well, what are the odds that in 5 years you'll regret doing that? If you feel like they're pretty high, you can just stop that now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm on the tip of like being able to put that in a more interesting way, but
I think Harry puts it best in chapter 10 maybe or 9 of Methods of Rationality, where he realizes that that 10 years from now he's going to just go back looking at this moment thinking, if only I had done this differently, my friends would still be alive and the world wouldn't be burning, and oh god, and like, oh yeah, it's this is that moment for that I'll be regretting in 10 years. Wish granted.
oh, right after he got sorted and he was like, I should have told them
Or
about
no,
the
wasn't that the... or maybe this came up a few times. I remember he was trying to get McGonagall to like let him buy a first aid kit, like a really intense one that had like blood coagulant and.
right.
Yeah. No, that was a few chapters before what I'm talking about, because in that one he was like preparing for things going bad, whereas this one he was realizing that he had a chance to go back in time and stop himself at the path of divergence into evil, except instead of going back in time, it was this time right now.
Oh.
Like. Your wish is granted. You are at that period.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I remember like Sam Harris does this section on some of his podcasts that's like the least interesting, where it's like a grab bag of like generic interview questions. And one of them is, what are you doing now that you suspect in 10 or 20 years you'll regret not doing, or like you'll regret doing, either like not spending enough time on or doing too much time doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And Robin Hanson had the best answer, and he's like, if I was aware I was doing something like that, I wouldn't be doing it.
I
right?
think Robin Hanson is one of the few people who have that answer to give, though.
It's true, which is weird, because that's also my answer. Like, I mean, yes and no. Like, maybe I would have wished that I read more in 10 years or something, but like, I'm currently not like kicking myself for not reading enough books.
Okay.
It's not like I never read, but I should probably read more. But like, I don't.
Oh, you just used that should word.
Oh shit!
Yeah.
I shouldn't use that word as much.
It's funny. 2 years ago, I was in that exact same position where I was really happy with everything I was doing, and now less so. Now I could answer that question with something.
That's worrisome, because I thought I was on an upward track that was going to stay up. And
well, I mean, nothing goes up forever, right? Everyone has their dips and valleys, and then comes back again.
I have just sort of a tangent about using the word should, in that I think like once you understand like what the problems are with the word should, you can just start using it in a way that means the right thing to you. And then he sort of gets to that in the later sections of like here's like what shoulds are for. You can use it to mean like, oh, that's the thing I want to update on, or like, oh, I made a mistake there, or like, maybe it's a good idea to do this thing. And like, as long as you like mean that to yourself internally, like it is actually very difficult to stop using the word.
Yeah, there's I get like you're using it in the spirit of the intended way that frames it well for you. To say that you shouldn't use the word should, like that's a tongue-in-cheek thing. But that's not like, that's not a knock down anything. That's missing the spirit of what it's getting at. You could also not use the word should and presumably keep making the same mental mistakes.
Right.
So like the point isn't don't use the word should. The point is notice when you use it and find out what's driving that.
Right, exactly. Like notice that you use the word should, and then like check if you are using it wrong internally.
All right.
I don't know that I have very much more to add.
I mean, I'm sold. I'm gonna start reading this.
Yeah.
Like immediately.
Oh,
so yeah, this I got exactly what I wanted out of this, which was a crash course. I guess just one thing, a crash course to prove to me that this is worth reading in whole. So
yeah, I guess my last thing that I'd say is that like we probably covered like less than half of the concepts in it, and they're explained in much more detail in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. This is like, I don't know, I was gonna say probably like better than going to the library and reading like the most popular 5 self-help books.
Yeah.
I think I can confidently, with fairly high confidence, say that like you'll probably get more out of reading these blog posts.
We live in a weird time, man, where people just like go on the internet and spend a lot of effort and time into making these helpful things for people. as opposed to putting them in books. And the books, self-help books, are usually crap too because people are doing it for money, I guess. Whereas this is like something he wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm really tempted now to name drop like the last 3 books I found really valuable.
Go ahead.
The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which ties together a bunch of different things I've been studying in this area like really well into one framework. And The Courage to be Disliked, which how do I even characterize that?
I would say it almost like it kind of is in the title, but it's also not, because it sounds like a way to not feel bad about like, or to not give a shit about what other people think of you, but like it's a lot more about kind of the idea of the intrinsic confidence, I think.
Yeah, and then it relates a lot to the guilt thing, I think, where like The Courage to be Disliked is about how to interact with the world effectively without self-flagellating in like a lot of various ways. And it's got a lot of things going on, but like how to not self-flagellate unnecessarily, and also why you should.
Also, what you should,
or why you should not self-flagellate.
Oh, okay, all right.
Has anyone here read the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck?
I have.
Is this like that?
I this might be an unpopular opinion. I didn't really like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Neither. I haven't read it, but I've had people recommend it to me. But I feel like maybe there's something I get out of it. But I feel like I already don't.
Yeah.
And so maybe they just thought like you would like this because maybe it jams with how you're already acting or something.
I think I didn't like it because it doesn't really tell you why you, or like it didn't make a convincing argument to me for why I shouldn't give a fuck. Whereas The Courage to be Disliked has this idea of vertical and horizontal relationships, which was a useful model that I could use to realize when either you're engaging with someone in a way that kind of makes them your superior, or that you're talking down to them.
That, and in combination with one of the other major ideas from that book of task interference, where like some tasks are your tasks, some tasks are other people's tasks. One of the somewhat harder to internalize things is that other people's emotions and dealing with them are their task. And that like it is actually you actually just get worse outcomes if you take other people's emotions as your own responsibility and other people's tasks as your own responsibility, and that like it is actually better and more effective for everyone in the long run to leave some things up to other people and just choose not to worry about it yourself.
I like the books like this that are just really packed full of ideas and concepts and tools that you can use. Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Probably, I don't want to like shit on it or anything. It wasn't a terrible book. I think that for a person who's never really thought about any of this kind of thing before, it could be really illuminating. If you already have, though, like Steven, you were saying, I already kind of don't give a fuck, then like it's probably not the book for you.
Good, I'll save myself all the time. The only self-help book I read was during a hard few years, probably, I don't know, 7 to 10 years ago. My autobiographical memory is all over the place. And I can't remember the name of it, but I'll bet it's the only self-help book that Richard Weissman wrote. And he's a psychologist who, he came to like skeptic meetups and stuff. And he was, I think he still is a big figure. It was kind of like influence, science, and practice, in that it was like, here's the things that like science has shown actually help. And I tried that, and I don't know if it helped or not. I guess I don't know how much. That's the thing that sucks about all of these. Like, I don't know how much worse off I would have been if I didn't do these things. But things like a gratitude journal, or just spending a few minutes a day like meditating on gratitude, things that you're happy about, even if you're not writing them down, but to write them down if you can. I'm trying to think of some other techniques. Oh, I guess like the wag the dog's tail thing, and it's like if you're slouching your posture and kind of dragging your feet, like just try and like stand up straight, walk more confidently, and like project positive body language that actually does turn inward.
Oh man, I hate to tell you this, but that's the first chapter of 12 Rules for Life.
I'm not
Except
surprised.
with lobsters.
Yeah.
With lobsters?
That's where the lobsters come from.
Holy shit.
If you're not familiar with the Jordan Peterson lobster memes, we'll leave that to Google. Yeah, have either of you read the self-authoring books by Jordan Peterson? Because I was recommended those by somebody.
I haven't read them. My roommate bought the course online and got a lot out of doing it.
Yeah, I was talking with David Youssef, who defends Jordan Peterson's like 2 to 3 year course. And he was like, here's the things that like science has shown actually help. And I was like, yeah, I had a, I was talking with David Youssef, who defends Jordan Peterson's like stuff that he's good at writing.
Yeah.
I guess pre-dark internet and intellectual dark web stuff.
Well, maybe.
I'm not sure when he wrote
12 Rules
these.
is pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Maybe his books are just better. Maybe his books and his not really just books are better than him talking about stuff today about random crap.
The books are still very long-winded. I think we've been over this. If you can skim the books or read a distillation of them.
But I'd considered buying the self-authoring program. Is that worth? I think it was $50.
I feel like you might be better with the CFAR, although I think they're kind of geared more now towards trying to steer people into AI research. So maybe there's what's the Monastic Academy?
Oh man, yeah, you could just go be a project-based monk for a couple months.
I mean, or you could read Replacing Guilt.
Yeah.
That sounds like it's an entire novel length of stuff there.
Yes, if you're ranking these, would you put this one as like one of the most valuable things to read on the subject of just like feeling better if you feel like your life sucks?
I put it pretty high up there.
Yeah, I think if you have any kind of even slightly bad relationship with guilt, you absolutely should read this.
Yeah, and also
that's the kind of endorsement I was looking for. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's the yes, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. No, I also would say that, I mean, maybe especially for you, Iniash, that part in the beginning about addressing like the nihilistic kind of mindset of like, why do I need to care about anything, or why should I care about anything, or can people even really care about anything, is a really useful part.
Okay. I will also give it a look.
A lot of self-help doesn't have that kind of why do I care about helping myself part. They just assume that like, well, of course you want to get more money or whatever the book is about, be more productive. But like, this is like let's take a step back. Why do you want to make more money or be more productive or whatever your goal is? And then like, is this the best, like if you don't have a goal, here's a way to find a good one. If you have one, is this the best thing you could be doing? Are you doing the things that you're like that will lead you toward that goal correctly? A lot of stuff that you're not gonna hear in normal self-help books.
Well, all right.
Yeah, that sounds outstanding.
Should we go on to the Less Wrong posts? Before we begin, I wanted to mention the book club thing that's happening.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a Discord.
Yes.
And in the Discord, like, some people wanted to start a book club, which is cool. I like book clubs. I go to a book club myself, right? And apparently they're going to be alternating fiction and nonfiction and stuff. And there was a big old vote as to what the first book would be. And I don't know. I was kind of hopeful that at some point somebody would be like, hey, we should read What Lies Dreaming. But it was the very first book picked. And I was like, holy shit. Okay.
Out of like 8 on the list, it won enormously. So.
Yeah. So I guess starting when this episode airs is when the book club begins. So go to our Discord if you want to be in on that. And they're starting with the first 4 or 5 chapters. And then I don't know how frequently they'll be discussing and reading and stuff. But yeah, that's the first one. There's a special channel for it in the Discord if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, online book club sounds like much more my vibe too. I think it encouraged me to read more, like dedicate actual, like that's probably part of the reason that you do a book club, that like it actually forces you to read stuff.
Yeah.
And like the social commitment, right? Rather than just like a personal commitment to finish a boring book.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's a boring book, I don't finish it, even if it's for book club. Well, that's not entirely true. I'll sometimes hate read a book, so I can talk about it in book club.
Hate reading books is pretty fun sometimes.
It stopped being fun for me for doing it solo, but doing it when I know I'm going to talk about it. Like the reason I go to book club is because I really love reading, but then when you're done reading, you have like this whole thing you've gone through, and you can't talk about it with anyone else because no one else has gone through. I think
you can try, but like you could just bore the shit out of one of your friends. Like, hey, let me tell you about this fun book I read. Okay, so in chapter 1, there's this guy, and they're like,
That's why I think that's why popularity is so big, because you can talk about other things. That's like why when the Harry Potter train gets rolling, like everyone gets on Harry Potter because you can actually talk about it. And the Marvel Universe stuff, once you know other people are doing the same thing, you can share the experience. And so yeah, the book club is like, I read a lot more books than people get popular in a year, you know? And so having this other dedicated core people that'll read the same books and we can all talk about it afterwards with is really cool.
So there are like 5 things there I want to touch on.
Okay.
I'll try and be as fast as possible.
All right.
And I'll probably forget at least 1 or 2. So 1, this is the fastest and least relevant. When things are popular, you want to talk about them. So Netflix, when they do a series, they do all the episodes at once.
Yes.
Which means go home and watch all of Stranger Things in one weekend so you can talk about it with your coworkers on Monday.
I can't either.
Many
people
can't.
Span.
And so that's hard for that. So Disney, when their thing launches in November, they're doing episodic weekly releases for their original content.
Thank God.
Which
I
would be
really
cool.
think Netflix should go to that too.
They hopefully need to make some changes. They're losing money.
You know, because I mean, binging was really big when it was introduced, but now it's like people want more content every weekend because they've gone through all of your season 8 or season whatever in a matter of a few hours.
Yeah, I think Netflix has been down in profits and new customers for the last like quarter or two, so they're going to be updating their model if they want to stay in business. And there's like actual healthy competition now, right? So, reading things and boring people by talking about them when they haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that to you two and to the listeners.
Oh God, wheel time again?
I finished no.
Okay.
I finished Draco Malfoy and the Practice of Rationality, which I think I plugged. If I didn't, I meant to.
I think you did.
I believe you did.
So it was fun. I enjoyed the whole thing. I do recommend reading it, although I am not as like vehement in my recommendation as I was in the first third of it. It changes kind of what it seemed like it was going to do a bit.
And then disappointing.
It is, and he opens the book with like, you know, heads up, people complained about the ending, and I'm like, how can they complain? This is going to be great. I'm loving it. And this isn't a spoiler, but the author said that it was a deliberate artistic choice to make the reader feel as ambushed as the characters, because the end is confusing. There's this complex plot that comes together, and you're like, what the fuck is happening? And he's like, I wanted you to feel that way too. And I'm like, okay, well, you succeeded. So there's that, and then there's a semi-satisfying 3-chapter epilogue that he apparently released like a year later, but since this was 3 years ago, it was all at once for me. Yeah. So I do recommend Draco Malfoy and the Practice of Rationality. It picks up at year 2, and it's just a continuation fic of Methods of Rationality. It's not another diversion of this and that. So, let's see. A few other things you mentioned. I
didn't mention that apparently some of the people in the Discord, they do audiobooks like most people do, especially people who listen to podcasts, because this is our preferred medium. And there's a bunch of people who are just like, or at least one person might be expanding now, who's like, sure, I'll read this into a microphone and upload it. So if you wanted What Lies Dreaming in audio form, I guess you can get it on the Discord, and I'll probably be putting it up at my website as well, so people can get it there.
Oh, sweet.
1 chapter at a time. Yeah. I think they've recorded the first 4 chapters now. And the 5th one is coming up. Yeah,
the guy doing the audiobook is Steve, who was on episode 14 of our podcast.
Oh, which one was that?
The Street Epistemology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a good episode.
Yeah. And he's a fun guy, and it seems exciting, and he is the guy doing the thing. He's the philosophist on our Discord. Yeah, that's him.
Okay. Philosophist is the one doing it. I don't know if that's who Steve is.
I'm 90% sure.
Okay.
I should triple check. It is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's weird going back to a medium where people are anonymous by default. Mm-hmm. I'm so used to social media, a lot of people just having their identities, and like now there's people that just have like a snake as their avatar.
I preferred that, I think. A consistent identity so that you still have your reputational effects, but enough anonymity that you can say things and you aren't worried about people burning your house down.
I don't know if I preferred it. I think like when I was very socially anxious all the time, I preferred it, and then like now that I'm less that, I find it a bit like, man, I don't know who any of these people are. And then they can just change their avatars and names all the time. So even if I kind of started to associate personality with them, now it's like, no, I don't know. Who's that? Is that person that person? Is that the same?
But if they change their avatar and personality, then that's just a new person with new reputation, right?
I guess.
I mean, unless they're saying like, hey, I'm the same person I was before. And then you're like, stop changing your name, you douchebag.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm talking about. Like that thing that's kind of annoying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is super annoying. Very much an inconvenience.
I don't have much of that experience, I guess, in my online life.
Well, the people I knew generally stuck with their handles because that's important. You have continuity of personality.
Yeah. I mean, I use my real name on here. I'm probably in the phone books, so if someone wants to burn my house down, they could. I'd ask that you don't, but I try not to be inflammatory enough to have anyone burn my house down, so.
Yeah. To be totally self-contradictory, I'm considering changing my name.
Okay.
And your personality? What the hell? Are you changing your avatar too?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
That's a transgender joke.
I was lining it up. I'm glad it worked. And now I killed the joke, so. That's awesome, yeah. That's a good reason, though. I don't know why people do it online. I guess, like, if you're changing whatever stuff, I don't know.
I'm actually generally pro people being able to change stuff that they want. It's just annoying for the other people that have to keep updating.
Yeah.
So, like, I get it when people get annoyed at trans people changing their name and they're pronouns and stuff. It's like, yeah, it is kind of a pain. But
you don't even have to be trans. You remember the person in high school? It was generally a girl. I hate for there to be a stereotype, but it was generally always a girl that would change her name every semester. You'd be like, oh, hey Rose, how you doing? She's like, no, I'm Candy now. I'm like, oh, okay, hi Candy. And a year later, hey Candy, well, nice to see you again after summer vacation. No, now I'm Catherine. I'm like, oh my god.
If I talked to more people, I might have had that problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
You what?
If I talked to more people, I might have had that problem.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I just didn't talk to enough people to meet that person.
No.
Well, I forgot all the other things I was going to plug with. I got the Draco Malfoy and the Practice of Rationality, so that was the big one.
Cool.
And you mentioned the audiobooks of What Lies Dreaming, which is super exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I feel like I'm forgetting something, but if it's important, it'll come back up. So,
in that case, should we go on to the less wrong posts? Okay, so the first one is making beliefs pay rent, and then in parentheses, in anticipated experiences. And this is a very famous post.
this
Yes, it
is
is.
the one. If I had to share one post with somebody about like what is this what is rationality, what is like what's an example of a technique, what do you mean you like use cognitive science to better your thinking, like this is the one I would point them to.
Huh.
This isn't the like my favorite post.
Yeah.
It's up there, but it's not the one I get the most personal meaning out of. But I feel like it's one that really quickly summarizes like, hey, look, here's a thing that you can notice in your head, maybe and this is an example of a technique, and it's succinctly readable in 5 minutes.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think I agree. This one kind of is the core of the skills that you would build on for the rest of the rationalist techniques.
Oh, I hope we can do it justice. Should I summarize the first intro part?
Sure.
So in the beginning, Eliezer relates the old question, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? One person says, yes it does, for it makes vibrations in the air. Another says, no it does not, for there's no auditory processing in any brain. There's a little bit more said, but I'm skipping ahead to, though the two argue, one saying no and the other saying yes, they do not anticipate any different experiences. The two think they have different models of the world, but they have no difference with respect to what they expect will happen to them. Their maps of the world do not diverge in any sensory detail. And he said things like, would they expect for if a recorder was put there for it not to pick up anything, or do they expect if similar sound waves hit an ear, would it not make any firings in the brain, that sort of thing. So
There was I think it was some internet thing that I missed, but my coworkers a couple years ago were talking about like the is water wet question.
right.
And I relayed this exact argument, and I'm like, first of all, well, I dove into the argument with them for a couple minutes, and I was like, wait a minute, let's just take a step back. What would be the difference if it was or wasn't?
Mhm.
Like, are we having different like predictions here? And they're like, no. And I'm like, then what's the point? And they're like, that's not the point. I'm like, that is the point.
Yeah. People seem to often confuse factual arguments for semantic arguments. The whole tree falling is kind of like, well, how are you defining the word sound? Is it the vibrations in the air existing or not, or whether there's someone listening to it's just you're making a semantics argument. Like, what are you actually trying to predict? And then
I never
what's up?
realized that was the other side of it, that there's auditory processing, which is what sound is. Like I was like, of course it makes a sound. What are you talking about? How is this a koan,
Yeah. Eliezer says, a foundational skill in the martial art of rationality is the ability to spot inside your own head psychological signs that you have a mental map of something and signs that you don't. So, in the example of the tree, how are you defining sound? And do you know that sound is vibrations in the air? And then could you test that? Could you record it, and is it going to show sound waves,
So that's where the, I guess, anticipated experiences part comes in.
Yeah, like basically it's kind of saying change the question to, do these two people walking through the forest anticipate having different experiences of hearing a tree fall? Yeah. And like the answer is no.
Right. And he points out a little bit later that the different experiences are not necessarily always like anticipations of different sensory experiences. Like he said, when you if you're trying to determine when a ball hits the ground, you got to use beliefs like Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second, and this building is 120 meters tall. And those aren't anticipations of a sensory experiences, they're verbal propositions in your head. But these two beliefs have inferential consequences that are direct sensory anticipation. Like when you would see the ball hit or when you would hear the thing on the ground. So your beliefs can change what you anticipate being your experiences.
Yeah. It was saying also, it's tempting to try to eliminate this by insisting that the only legitimate kind of belief is the anticipation of sensory experience, but the world actually has a lot of data that we can't sense. Like, we can't see atoms, there's sounds past our range, there's colors we can't see. We can't see math.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could use math to calculate when the ball is going to hit the ground. Humans are better than any other species at learning to model the unseen. And then Eliezer says, this is both our great strength and our great weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Because humans often believe in things that are not only seen, but unreal.
Yeah.
Like, he brought up again the alchemist's concept of phlogiston being something that creates fire, causes heat. Like, what is it? I don't know. It's the thing that does it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it must exist if it happens.
Right. I anticipate that when I put heat on this wood, phlogiston will come out, and that'll make bright lights and more heat, I guess. But it wasn't tied to anything real.
Yeah, it's tied to the kind of inferential chain there. Well, something causes the fire, so I'm going to call it phlogiston.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah, this seems like it should be a thing that it is true. Or kind of ideas about things like ghosts, because we've evolved to model things as being agents. Like, we're evolved to model other human minds, so we see lots of things as either having been made by a human or having some kind of human-like sentience and agency and a reason that it's doing what it's doing that like follows anthropic principles.
Yeah, he mentioned a good way to, well, let me just read the poll then. The rationalist virtue of empiricism consists of constantly asking which experiences our beliefs predict, or better yet, prohibit. Do you believe that phlogiston is the cause of fire? Then what do you expect to see happen because of that? Do you believe that if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it still makes a sound? Then what experiences must therefore befall you? It is even better to ask what experiences must not happen to you. Do you believe that elan vital explains the mysterious aliveness of living beings? Then what does this belief not allow to happen? What would definitely falsify this belief? A null answer means that your belief does not constrain experiences. It permits anything to happen to you. So, yeah, if your beliefs don't actually disallow things from happening, they don't do much of anything.
Yeah. There was also, do unreal things connect to any sensory experiences? No. I'm trying to think, like, I'm remembering, what was that show, Ghost Hunters?
Mm-hmm.
Where they were they're using carpentry tools incorrectly and then trying to say that it's evidence of ghosts, but if a ghost were a real thing, you would anticipate some kind of sensory experience, maybe a cold drop, maybe sounds, maybe you could capture something on video.
Except for all of those, and this is, I don't think Brian Dunning was the first one to put it this way, but he put it this way most succinctly when I came across it, that like everything that the ghost hunters do, all their tools of low frequency vibrations, cold spots, etc. It's like they use all of these and be like, look, ghosts, and it's like we haven't established that ghosts do that. So like ghosts have no known properties. So to say that this cold drop is indicative of a ghost means that would necessitate that we've already established that ghosts make things cold.
I mean,
why on earth should that be the case? Like, if you ask me,
supposedly there's a bunch of a lot of anecdotal reports of people seeing ghosts, and they say that there's connected phenomena. If people were actually able to consistently measure the same phenomena in places where people also experience psychological disturbance, then maybe that would be something interesting. But pretty much what we've shown is that no,
sure, or
we
like
cannot measure anything like that.
Or like an old basement with creaky hinges, like, maybe you get light carbon monoxide poisoning down there and you start hallucinating stuff. Like, that would explain all these things as well, right? What we need is like a ghost in a box that we can hold a thermometer to, that we can poke with a stick, that we can put a microphone next to, and all that stuff.
Well, lots of times they say that what causes these things to happen is ectoplasm.
Right.
Which is basically phlogiston for ghosts, right?
I don't know if the ghost hunters say that. I know the Ghostbusters did.
Yeah.
But, like, not to say that ghost hunting is a sophisticated field. Just
about as sophisticated as ghost
that
busting.
Unsophisticated. Yeah. They're not literally cartoon caricatures of themselves. Exactly. Anyway, how about belief in belief?
Oh, can I close out with what his ending paragraph, which is the one that I loved?
Yeah. I know which one you're talking about.
At the very end, he says, above all, don't ask what to believe, ask what to anticipate. Every question of belief should flow from a question of anticipation, and that question of anticipation should be the center of the inquiry. Every guess of belief should begin by flowing to a specific guess of anticipation and should continue to pay rent in future anticipations. If a belief turns deadbeat, evict it. Which is just a great thing. Like, if your beliefs are doing nothing for you at all, why do you even have them?
Gotta make them pay rent.
That's right. Using up all that valuable brain real estate. So, belief and belief.
Belief and belief starts with Carl Sagan's invisible dragon parable, which briefly is like the friend comes to you and says, hey, I've got a dragon in my garage. And you're like, that's so cool. I want to see. Oh, well, you can't really see it. It's invisible. Oh, okay. Well, no problem. I'll throw some flour on it. Well, it's permeable to flour. Okay. Well, we'll put, we'll measure the amount of oxygen and CO2 in the air and we'll watch it breathe. Well, it doesn't actually, exhale CO2. Okay, well, listen for its footsteps. Well, it has inaudible footsteps. And so Carl Sagan uses this as the idea that bad hypotheses need to do fast footwork in order to avoid falsification, right?
Yeah.
And I liked this because I'd read Science as a Candle in the Dark. That's the subtitle to
The Demon Haunted World.
Thank you.
Yeah,
The Demon
it's a
Haunted
great
World.
book.
Yeah, which is like hey, what's skepticism? Read this book.
Yeah.
And Carl Sagan's a beautiful author and great examples, and he's a smart guy as
And
underselling
very
it.
compassionate, too.
I know, he was wonderful.
Some people I know didn't like the tone of the New Atheists. I think Carl Sagan kind of... If you're somebody that's just put off by Richard Dawkins for whatever reason, then I would recommend people read Carl Sagan because it's just almost the Mr. Rogers of science.
Yeah, he
Got the sweater vest and everything, I think.
Yeah, imagine Neil
No, he
deGrasse.
had a turtleneck.
Yeah, he did. Neil deGrasse Tyson's I think Carl Sagan's shoes were so big that five people fill them now. But Neil deGrasse Tyson fills them in some of the ways, like for example, hosting Cosmos. I could go on and on. If anyone hasn't seen the first episode of the revamp of Cosmos, and if you're not interested, even just watch the last 10 minutes to get a kind of feel for the character of who Carl Sagan was. I could go on, but I don't know.
Hail Sagan.
Yeah, he's great. Hail Sagan, yes. So what I liked about this post is that I was already familiar with it, and as a budding young rationalist coming across this, I'm like, finally, something I've heard of. And then he goes on to expand it in a way that I thought was really interesting. So,
Yeah.
Belief in belief.
Yeah, he says that he uses this parable to make a different point. The claimant must have an accurate model of the situation somewhere in their mind, because they can anticipate in advance exactly which experimental results they'll need to excuse. Which is pretty cool when you think about it.
Yep. Yeah, we're capable of holding a lot of contradictory beliefs as humans. People are really good at compartmentalization. I used to be really confused as to how, a biologist who specializes in studying the RNA of bacteria can also be a young Earth creationist.
Right.
And that's how you explained it. It's just this is my science world beliefs and this is my religion world beliefs, and they don't overlap.
It's still not clear to me how to...
context that I activate them in.
And yet somehow, somewhere deep in his brain, there's something like making excuses for one, subconsciously, because he can't admit that he knows.
It's still not clear to me. So I understand, yes, you can take your science coat off and put your church coat on Sunday. It's still not clear to me how you don't notice that you're doing that.
You don't have the self-awareness.
Yeah.
Or you are aware of the cognitive dissonance, and then you just always push it to the side because you're well, not dealing with that. I remember doing that.
Oh.
A thing that parts of your mind can do is actively suppress other thoughts, if it's useful to do so.
If you're not inclined to listen to the part of you that's saying, "Hey, shut up over there," right?
Right, you have to have a distaste for shutting down your own thoughts to even escape this in the first place.
I think that's what I've always had. I've never liked. I've always noticed when I was suppressing a thought.
Mm-hmm. And it always kind of hurts, right?
It's this weird stingy feeling in my brain, and I think part of, I guess, methods of rationality is raising that to a louder noise or a hurtier hurt, just so you're aware that you're doing it.
I almost think that the sequences and the methods are written for people who already like have that, and this is ways of how to fix the things that raise those alarms all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then now that you've got them and you've got all this bulwark in place, what you can do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think that was the context of the sequences. This was kind of written after new atheism and skepticism became popular.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is-
I think Stephen and I were talking about this one day. We were just hanging out randomly, but like, I feel like I discovered the sequences after I kind of went through my like angry atheist phase. I'm gonna argue with believers, and
Yeah.
then like I that kind of got tired of that, and it's like this is kind of like the next step, I think.
Right.
Yeah, that was my journey too. It's also worth pointing out that Carl Sagan's writings predates the New Atheists by like 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the tone of religion sucks, man. What I mean,
The term
I'm
wouldn't
co-
have been tolerated 20 years ago.
exactly. And to be fair, I think that was basically Sagan's opinion, but he was way nicer about it.
I think
And
he's
when I
on
s- when-
record
when-
saying that, actually, like being much less charitable when he's like in his own house.
And also, that wasn't 20 years ago. That was like 35 years ago.
But 20 years before the New Atheists.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah, it just seems like that was yesterday because we're old.
Yes. Our younger listeners are like, Jesus Christ, man.
That one 14-year-old.
Jeez.
Like,
yeah.
man, these guys are old.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get past the explicit warning on iTunes to listen to this?
Do we have an explicit warning?
I think so.
We say fuck occasionally.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess we talk about dead babies and dead baby Hitler.
I'm
a
not
lot.
sure we've. Well, okay, we do talk about dead baby Hitler.
All right.
Did we
So-
finish summarizing this?
Yes.
Empiricism's supposed to prevent us from making this class of mistake, because our beliefs are supposed to pay rent, as we just got finished explaining. But then, and this kind of also ties back into replacing guilt, what about the beliefs that you're supposed to believe? Eliezer brings up Santa Claus when you're a kid. And then also has a little Daniel Dennett quote, where it's difficult to believe a thing, it's often much easier to believe that you ought to believe it.
Should.
And then it gets worse. Nobody will admit to themselves, I don't believe in the ultimate cosmic sky, that I don't believe the ultimate cosmic sky is blue and green, but I believe I ought to believe it. Not unless they're unusually capable of acknowledging their own lack of virtue. Which kind of answers your problem with that, Stephen.
Yeah.
People don't want to believe in belief, they just believe in belief, they just believe in belief.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hard to say.
It is. Yeah. Again, that was people don't believe in belief and belief. They just believe in belief.
There we go.
What's virtuous is to believe, not to believe in believing.
Yeah, I think I had another thing with Dan Dennett there, but I forgot what it was. Yep, it's gone. Other than if you like that little witticism of so Dennett's quote was, "Where it's difficult to believe a thing, it's often much easier to believe that you ought to believe it." I think Dennett coined the term "belief and belief."
I think so too.
Yeah, there's a lot of things floating around there that Dennett's actually responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
The only book of his that I actually finished reading was Breaking the Spell. Okay. A lot of his stuff is, and maybe I should try again. It's been 10 or 15 years since I've tried, but back when I was a teenager, it was too dense to, like, I read it because, like, this seems really cool, and I'm just like, this is getting hard, and you're not keeping my interest, but I bet it would now, so. Anyway, yeah. So, belief should include unspoken anticipation controllers. Belief in belief should include unspoken cognitive behavior guiders. The dragon claimant anticipates as if there's no dragon in the garage and makes excuses as if they believed in the belief. That's what I was going to say about Dennett, was that I remember he had another quote that there are more people that believe in belief than there are people who actually believe, because he's met, like, I don't know, people like pastors struggling with, like, not believing in stuff anymore but thinking that they should. Mm-hmm. And kind of by default, every believer believes in belief. Mm-hmm. And as long as there's one person who just believes, or rather, every believer, like, believes, right? Mm-hmm. And there's at least some people who believe in belief, that, like, I should still be believing this. And that's like that's a de facto premise of belief. So it was just fun to imagine, like, yes, there are by necessity more people who believe in belief than there are people who actually believe stuff. Yeah. It's not that interesting, but just, again, it was one of those other little Dennett kind of, he has this way of being able to put on, like, meta glasses whenever he wants.
Well, I think it seems like actually like a rationalist virtue to, like, be able to have beliefs but not believe in those beliefs, of, like, have the belief but then, like, be ready to just, like, throw it away as soon as you see any counter evidence that is convincing.
Yeah, have beliefs that you can update.
Right. I think update is
when
a
you
better
encounter
term
evidence.
than just throw away
Well,
as soon as you see an E.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
relinquishment
yeah.
is one of the 12 virtues of rationality.
Yeah.
Which
But
we
relinquishment with enough cause.
Right. Yeah, we haven't done the 12 virtues. Maybe we'll do that at some point.
Yeah.
All right. The 12 virtues is this short post that I won't go into any of them, but it's the, as the title suggests, the 12 virtues of rationality, and it's all written in like preachy high talk.
Mm-hmm.
That if this was your first exposure to the community, you'd be like, oh, this guy's insane, and they're all cultists. But it gives nice flowery language to like refer back to and say, thus it was written, or hence it was written that this. Yeah. And as long as you know you're doing it tongue in cheek, as everyone does, unless you're coming across one of these things in the wild, then it's a lot of fun to have kind of that kind of highfalutin language to point things at.
Eliezer says that it's not psychologically realistic to say that the dragon claimant believes it's beneficial to believe that there's a dragon, but it is realistic to say that the dragon claimant anticipates as if there is no dragon in the garage and makes excuses as if they believed.
All right, and then we had one more sequence,
Bayesian judo,
which is just a little story.
It's fun.
It's a fun story. So, the true tales of Eliezer Yudkowsky. So, Eliezer Yudkowsky is at a dinner party when someone said to him,
You're
Oh, that's right. I'm the doofus. I don't believe artificial intelligence is possible because only God can make a soul.
Eliezer replied,
You mean if I can make an artificial intelligence, it proves your religion is false?
When realizing that he'd made his hypothesis vulnerable to falsification, he then said,
Well, I didn't mean that you couldn't make an intelligence, just that it couldn't be emotional in the same way we are.
To which Eliezer replied,
Well, so if I make an artificial intelligence that, without being deliberately programmed, without any sort of script, starts talking about an emotional life that sounds like ours, that means your religion is wrong.
I guess we may have to agree to disagree on this.
Then Eliezer brought up Omen's agreement theorem, which shows that no two rationalists can agree to disagree.
If two people disagree with each other, at least one of them must be doing something wrong.
Finally, he said,
Well, I guess I was really trying to say that I don't think you can make something eternal.
Well, I don't think so either. I'm glad we were able to reach agreement on this, as Omen's agreement theorem requires.
To which Eliezer stretched out his hand, and he shook it, and then he wandered away.
I love the line, the one realized he had just made his hypothesis vulnerable to falsification. But, dude, who would have come up with that reply?
Well, that's why I liked in the longer version, he says, at this point I must have become divinely inspired, because I instantly responded. You mean if I can make artificial intelligence that proves your religion's false?
Like, I would have thought of something like, well, that's stupid, God doesn't exist, or souls don't exist, or something, like, this will never be an issue because there are no souls. But it was like, oh, I can disprove your God with your own claim.
He got to have a shower thought, like, in real time and have that conversation.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I also want to say that the reason I put these 3 in for this week instead of just 2 like we normally do is because this is directly ties back to making beliefs pay rent in anticipated experience. It's one of those things that what does your beliefs not allow to happen, right? If this guy really believes that only God can make a soul, then you cannot create an AI. So that is actually a belief that pays rent in anticipated experience, except then he walked it back right away because, can't have your God be falsifiable.
But then, assuming that he stuck to it and actually updated, he then changed his belief to be, different. So his new belief is...
His new belief would be there's no God once there's an AI.
Exactly.
Which isn't actually going to happen. But that was a beautiful example of beliefs paying rent.
Yeah.
And using that to, Bayesian judo someone into atheism.
Yeah. Like, your beliefs can't kind of just be a bunch of nodes unconnected from each other. It's real easy to actually, point out contradictory thoughts. I think, isn't that what people do when they're doing street epistemology? Is not even really tell the person things, but just ask them questions, leading them to realize that the things they believe are contradictory.
Yeah. The Socratic method.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, that you don't really... And I think our street epistemologist, his name was also Stephen, wasn't it?
I don't remember. It's been like 2.5 years.
I'm 90% sure, because that's a great name, and I think it stuck with me.
Okay, cool.
I think that I think street epistemology is practiced in a way that's slightly less aggressive than the Socratic method, But that's sort of the same thing. It's like, look, if you really believe this, then you'd be saying this, right? And it's like, well, I'm not saying that, so I must not really believe this. Yeah.
I also, back when I was getting into atheism, when new atheism was a new thing, that was what a lot of the forum stuff was. It was basically, it wasn't street epistemology, because street epistemology is friendly, and it like uses the Socratic method to trick people into questioning their own beliefs, right? Whereas the forums were a lot of like, boom, checkmate atheist, or boom, checkmate theist, you know? I just proved the logical contradiction in your own claims.
If people evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys?
Checkmate atheists.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. So for next time, we will be covering the Less Wrong Posts, Professing and Cheering, and Belief as Attire. And there will be links to those on our website, thebayesianconspiracy.com.
I think I've also related to both of those in examples, either I think off the air to both of you guys, that I've seen it happen in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in these situations and I'm like, oh man, this is applause lights, which I think is a separate post, but it's the same thing as professing and cheering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I'm watching this happen. It was very disconcerting. Yeah, great.
Cool. We have one listener feedback and one question from the podcaster.
All right.
So is it okay if we indulge me as I ask a question?
Please.
All right. So for the past, I don't know, I think 3 months now, past 6 episodes or so, we've sort of changed our editing strategy to where before...
Actually, it's not important to describe the difference.
I actually kind of want to describe the difference
Okay.
briefly because I feel really insecure. Before, we would go through the entire thing, literally re-listening to every minute of this, and we would cut out a lot of the likes, long pauses, that kind of stuff, which... First of all, I thought was very important in a social good kind of way, because that would cut the time of a podcast from 2 hours to 1 hour and 50 minutes. Just cutting out all that stuff that literally conveys no information. It's just giving us time to think. And, when you're talking with 2-3 other people in a room, that's no big deal. But when you're being listened to by thousands of people, you add up 10 minutes every 2 weeks. That is a huge amount of human productive time that is being lost for nothing. And so I felt like a virtuous person for doing this, right? And I wished all podcasts would do that. Nothing annoys me more than just shit wasting my time.
Can I point out that there are podcast apps like Overcast for iOS that automatically skip dead air?
Yeah, but they don't skip and such stuff.
That's true.
Yeah.
I should also point out that before you make the rest of this point, that the last episode I did kind of go through and crawl through. I'm not exactly sure why.
Mm-hmm.
So this, if you're thinking how's the episodes previously sounded, the last episode, Jesus, what was even the topic?
Secret to Our Success? No, that was 2 episodes ago at this point. Last episode was Are You Jesus or Hitler?
Right.
Yeah.
So that one I did crawl through and kind of edit slowly. I'm not exactly sure why I did that. I think this was the first time I edited on my new monitor, and it was nice and easy.
Cool.
So yeah, all right.
But the other thing is that when I listen to podcasts, I always listen to them sped up, and that makes everyone in them sound smarter. And I was always kind of happy, people are probably listening to us sped up, so we sound smarter. And now that we're cutting out all the ums and we sound even smarter. So now I'm also, what we've basically done is stop doing that. It was just taking way too long to edit every episode.
It takes about 4 minutes a minute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 to 4 minutes per minute to edit that way.
Right. So a 2-hour podcast would take us 6 to 8 hours to edit.
Yeah.
And it was too much. And we kept hearing about friends that have their own podcast that they put online a half hour after they record them. And we were like, shit, we got to get in on that action. So basically, we now just here and there cut out some major flubs when we noticed them happening and put it up as is. And I'm basically wondering, please, if our listeners are willing to give us some feedback. Does it sound a lot worse now? Do you notice a drop in quality? Do we sound stupid?
Do you have any recommendations for free audio processing software that we could use?
That's an option too.
If there's software that will cut out that sort of shit, yeah.
Yeah, I
don't know if it exists or not. It would be super cool if it did. It might just be the thing that you need a human to do, but...
Yeah.
I mean, Audacity, if it was all on one track, can cut dead air.
Right, it can cut dead air, but it
since we
can't
have
cut stuttering and such.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
If there's some kind of audio version of Photoshop filters that would just take a lot of the work out.
If anyone needs inspiration for a side project, go ahead and make that.
Problem is,
It might
Photoshop
exist.
isn't free.
Well,
Well, even if it's modestly expensive,
Yeah.
we have patron support to buy it. So
That's true.
um,
If it makes us sound better and reduces wasted human productive hours.
yeah, mainly
the
it was
world.
just that it would take 6 to 8 hours to edit, and then another hour for uploading, downloading, adding the intro and outro music, and so it would take like 10 hours to do, which is the other main reason that we weren't doing this every week.
Yeah.
So
Hopefully I can replace the guilt of not doing this anymore with something else.
for what I guess two other meta points on that. One, I like Sam Harris doesn't chop those out of his conversations, and
yeah,
people.
but Sam Harris is naturally genius level talking person.
Oh, but
See? This is the kind of shit I gotta edit.
no, I think I
Please leave it in.
no, I think he has ums and stutters, and so does everybody. I think that's part of what makes speech natural.
Mm-hmm.
For the first like dozen of these, we went through and we would cut out every stammer, every this and that took like 12, 15 hours.
Yeah.
And then I listened to like Rationally Speaking, or really every podcast, and people talk like they talk, and a podcast sounds conversational, and so I don't burn a lot of fuel worrying about does this sound like it's scripted, like we're reading this from I'm doing these things. I'm pausing and on all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
That, and I'm told. So you said you listen to podcasts to speed up.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to be the only person who likes listening at regular speed because I gives me a chance to like actually think in the normal speed of human speech to process what I'm listening to. But I'm told by at least one person that they don't listen to this sped up because of my speaking rate.
Yes.
You should have talked to me 10 years ago. I was incomprehensible. And right now I'm making an effort to be extra slow, but I think I've gotten a lot better at talking slower, so maybe you can listen to it at 1.15 speed, but
It would
it
would be really interesting to hear you 10 years ago.
I could go really fast. Like this, I was able to talk at a pretty fast pace where people could understand and I could understand them, and it would be just more or less fine.
Okay.
That was sort of an example.
Yeah, that wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad. That wasn't maybe as bad as it could be. It's been a while. It's a practice habit that I do in the rest of my life too.
Probably requires your listeners to be like, alert though.
Yeah. Or to not care what you're saying and just pretend like they're listening.
Right.
The podcast Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, they both just naturally talk at 1.5x speed, and just all the time.
They sound so excited about everything. It's actually really adorable. That's a good
That's awesome.
podcast.
I love those kind of people. Like Mr. Peanut Butter. Oh, he's the best.
Who?
It was Mr. Peanut Butter.
Mr. Peanut Butter from BoJack Horseman.
The adorable naive dog friend.
Yeah. Okay, listener feedback.
What is it?
Rockham on the subreddit says, this is actually something that we got a number of people saying, not just Rockham, and it was mentioned in the Discord a few times as well, so I'll go ahead and say it. Regarding the risk-free assets, the post risk-free bonds aren't, or what, I don't remember the exact name, but Rockham is the one I pulled, says, regarding risk-free assets, it's not that financial theory is too stupid to realize that there is no such thing. Rather the opposite. But it's still so damn useful that we take the next best thing. And for US-based writers, it was US government bonds. And a bunch of people said the same thing, that like, yeah, actual finance people know that there's no such thing that's completely risk-free, and this is just the closest thing in the world to what a risk-free would be, so they use that term to mean like lowest risk you can possibly get. And I think that I think we overemphasized the part that these aren't risk-free from the post, because especially the peak end theory, which I'm sure you're familiar with, generally what you remember from experience is the highest point and the end, right? Which is why Eliezer always ends his posts with something really punchy, and generally the thing that was his most driving theme in the post. And at the end of that one, he basically said, it's terrifying that this risk-free thing that we have, that we consider the most solid thing in the world, is this fucking risky when you really think about it. That what are the chances the U.S. is going to be around for the next 300 years? And doesn't that mean that there's a 10% chance every 30 years, or 10% of that chance every 30 years that it's going to collapse? I think the point he was making that was that the world, even when we use the term risk-free, is remarkably dangerous and risky, and it's just a bad term to use because there's so much inherent risk in just living on this earth, and that sucks, and we have to fix that shit because holy crap.
Totally. I saw that comment and some of the discussion on the Discord, which we should plug because people are on there all the time. It's great. If you're already on Discord, it might be a fun place to hang out.
It is actually there's enough chatter that I can't keep up with it anymore. Every now and then I'll drop in and read like 50 messages, but I can't stay current.
Yeah, same. But I guess there's no way to to solve that problem other than maybe making more channels or something. I'll ask some Discord experts.
Yeah.
I just occasionally comment on things that I do see and hope that they still are relevant when people see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I've just gone in and been like, here's a random thing I found, unrelated to anything anyone's talking about right now.
Right.
I'm not going to pretend that I'm, like, chatting synchronously.
No, that's sort of my strategy too. But I think in the post that this was responding to, Yudkowsky wasn't saying that, economists are talking about risk-free things and they're missing it, and I'm the only one who notices that it's risky. I think he was specifically calling out Taleb's use of the word a risk-free investment like government bonds, right?
Oh, because Taleb should have, especially given the context of that book, not used that term.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that was basically the point.
Okay.
Maybe I was being too literal with it. Maybe I was making a more general point that these people were responding to. But the way I read it, he was saying, I mean, it's not like him to make a post complaining about one thing one person said.
All right.
So maybe it makes sense that he was talking about a broader problem. But
That's why I read it as we have to make the world less prone to collapse and death.
Totally. That reminds me of my awesome life insurance agent who got me hooked up with cryonics, Rudy Hoffman. He works for Kansas City Life, which apparently is like the most secure insurance company on the planet. They have no debt. They own all the properties where they have offices. They don't just rent office space.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, yeah, basically. So I talked to him, because he's also signed up for cryonics through Kansas City Life, and he's like, yeah, I want this to work, so that's why I choose them. He's also a great salesperson. I think that's part of it too. But he's like, yeah, I mean, barring anything short of like a zombie apocalypse, like Kansas City Life will be the last life insurance company to fall. They'll survive floods, natural disasters, all that stuff because they own their property and it's all insured. So
I want to see the zombie movie where like the last bastion of humanity is this insurance company and they've got their shotguns and they're protecting all the uploaded consciousnesses.
Awesome.
Brains in a jar, and the zombies are like, brains in a jar.
Already deskulled.
So convenient.
I can imagine actually being a premise for a fun short story where it's like, I can imagine, armed altruistic rationalists protecting the tanks in Michigan full of cryo protected people. Hey. Like, no, they're gonna make it.
Writers, steal this idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let us thank our patron.
Yes.
I don't remember whose turn it is to do the thinking.
I did last week.
I'll do it.
All right.
You always give me the ones that are hard to pronounce.
You volunteered this time.
I did. Smriti Jha is our patron this time. Thank you, Smriti. I hope I didn't just butcher your name terribly, and if I did, I'm sorry. But we still like you anyway, and I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to thank this person.
We are thankful that people do this thing, help us keep going, and help us, never mind. I keep hammering on how I feel appreciated when I do this, and I should stop doing that because it gets tired.
Well, it's hard
every time, right?
It's hard not to, but This is the part of the podcast of other podcasts that I skip.
Right.
Like I'll get to the part where they say the name, and then they'll give 90 seconds how much they appreciate it. But that doesn't. If we cut down the time that we emphasize appreciation, doesn't mean that we appreciate it any less.
Right.
It means the world to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. If I was the person who was being thanked, I would listen to that part of the podcast and be like, "That's me."
Yeah.
All right.
So
I get to
at least one person who's listening to this part being like, "That's me." Yay! Also, man, they mispronounced my name.
I wouldn't plug this unprompted, but you reminded me. Brian Dunning sent out like an email because he's recently, I guess in the last year or so, started thanking people who supported the show, and he sent an email out like a month in advance. Hey, on episode I forget which one, I'll be thanking your name. Do you care how I attribute it? And I probably listened to him say, it was very nice and thoughtful, and it appreciated it. So yeah. That was nice. So I can confirm that when you get a shout out. In fact, every podcast that I've given money to, I've heard my name said, and it makes me smile. So, and I don't have a hard name to say. So Smriti Jha, if we did ruin it, by all means, write in and we'll fix it. But if not, if we got close enough, then still, we really appreciate it, and everyone know that that's important to us.
Hell yes. All right. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome.
Good night, everyone.
okay to